Remember this bit from the Season of the Slicer trailer? And I'm sure you remember this bit from last week's Ability TWAB. But what you probably don't remember is this small footnote from some May 11th patch notes, which updated an exotic that people thought was pretty useless and made it into something that could actually be quite fun with an often underused skill tree. I always find it fun to make a kind of seasonal mess around build, and knowing that there were some buffs coming the way of Middle Tree Sunbreaker next season, I thought I'd put together a Hammer Titan build. I wanted to have a little bit of fun with Cryosthea here. It's a slightly unwieldy exotic because of how the bullets only fire when your finger comes off the mouse, but nevertheless it's fun to freeze people and smash them with a hammer like you saw in that trailer. However, what I found when I was making this build was that there are some insanely synergistic new mods that work very well with hammers and with Severance Enclosure. And so with a little bit of testing and a little bit of build crafting, I have come up with this build, which is an all-out brawler with potential for great ad clear, but also with a fair bit of setup, very good single target damage. And so, channeling my best Aurora impression, I'm going to do a little bit of a build breakdown with some numbers of why this may be the build to watch out for next season. This build doesn't actually use any seasonal mods from Season of the Splicer, which means it's going to be equally strong next season, potentially even stronger, depending on what artifact mods we get then. The basic premise of Cryosthesia is that you can freeze an enemy and then, using the hammer, shatter that enemy to trigger Cryosthesia's automatic reload. To take that up to the next level, what Severance Enclosure does is will trigger an explosion on that enemy who dies. That will basically augment the stasis explosion that comes out of the frozen target. But really, that's just a fun way to enable Cryosthesia. You don't really need to freeze the target at all unless you want a more reliable way to land your hammer. The explosion is still triggered nevertheless. You can build stacks of Roaring Flames quickly, although the enemies killed by the explosion will not give you stacks of Roaring Flames. As you might be able to see in the clip behind me, there is a bit of a delay, an internal cooldown between Severance's explosions. So not every single hammer throw will yield an explosion if you're throwing them in quick succession. That's the mass ad clear portion of the build. But you might be asking, exploding hammers on trash ads, how does that translate to single target damage? Well, it revolves around a few portions of the build. First of all, we have Roaring Flames. That's seen a lot of prominence this season with use in low-man Atheons. By hitting consecutive hammers, you're going to build up the damage that your throwing hammer can do. It will also work with your grenades, but the main point of this is your throwing hammer. Testing it out on Errol's friend Carl, we're going to see that we can hit for about 31.5 thousand damage. That's not that great. You know, it's just a little chip of that Colossus's health. So the next point of the build is to get a 1-2 punch shotgun. I'm using the Deicide, which you can get from Umbrals this season. You line up a 1-2 punch by hitting every pellet in the spread. Make sure your Roaring Flames is on ×3. Throw the hammer, and you do 94,000 damage. That's a little bit better, but still, we can push this further. This is where we get into the armor portion of the build. Here's how it's going to work. First up, we have Overload Wellmaker. Going in for a finisher, we'll spawn 2 Arc Elemental Wells on top of you. We combo this with Well of Ions. Picking up an Arc Elemental Well causes your next melee to deal additional damage. So there we go, we have a third potential damage stack. So examining Roaring Flames and the Well of Ions combined total damage, you are going to hit for 40.8k. So that's actually not as good as 1-2 punch. But the question is, what happens when you use them together? 122.5 thousand damage. To put that into context, it is just under double the damage of a Lasting Impression rocket, and just under half the damage of a Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun. And it does take a little bit of setting up, but if you can pull it off, smack, satisfying. And what's more, because it's a boss you've just killed, the explosion triggered by Severance Enclosure is going to be extra big. And what's even better is that next season this hammer is getting its buff of about 50% versus powerful PvE combatants. Who knows how much damage it's going to be able to deal. And you want to see something dumb? Here's something dumb. The build is incredibly synergistic because Severance Enclosure also works on finishes. So when you're going into finish for that Well of Ions effect, you're also going to be able to generate another explosion. We're going to stick a few more mods in here to improve the synergy further. First of all, I've thrown on Explosive Wellmaker, which is going to proc off the Severance Enclosure Explosion. It's very handy in the event that you lose your hammer, you want to throw more grenades, you can pick it up and keep in the fight. We're also going to put on Impact Induction, which means that you can spam that hammer as much as you want, because theoretically it doesn't have a cooldown, and that will greatly improve the number of grenades that you can throw as well. We are also using Invigoration as a kind of in case of emergency thing where you can generate orbs and pick them up to bring your hammer back faster. The two remaining mods in this build are Elemental Charge, which means that you will get charged with light when you pick up those 2 Arc Wells, and that will power a Reactive Pulse, which gives you a handy overshield doing your finishes, and also allows you to clear trash ads around you more with the electrocuting burst of damage. This has been nerfed since its initial form, but combine it with the Severance Enclosure Explosions, suddenly these tick damages in areas around you are going to become extremely potent in clearing waves with ads. For general content, this is going to be an amazing brawling build for just having a bit of fun, having strong abilities, using Cryesthesia for its best possible application, and just generally making the most of the buffs. In terms of heavy, I've decided to pair it with the LMG, but I think you probably want to pair it with something that has ranged capabilities. This build, I think I'll probably end up using it as my casual build next season. You could easily swap Severance Enclosure out for Cuirass of Falling Star for kind of boss clearing content. You could also swap out Cryesthesia for Monte Carlo if you weren't having a melee ability that was on such a reliable low cooldown. Just going to finish off with some late night strike gameplay showing this build off. Just remember you heard it here first when everyone's tossing hammers around next season. Hope you enjoyed.